What if I told you that working on a cruise ship at night isn't just about fixing engines, but also about following a set of unwritten, unsettling rules? Prepare to have your perception of cruise travel shattered. I'm pulling back the curtain on the bizarre world of night shift cruise ship mechanic, where the most unsettling things happen when no one is watching. My name is David Kellner, and I've been working the night shift aboard the MS Serenity for 3 years now. 3 years of navigating corridors that transform from bustling pathways into tomb-like passages after midnight. 3 years of maintaining the mechanical heartbeat of a floating city while its inhabitants dream peacefully above me, completely unaware of what happens in the depths below their feet. The transition from day to night on a cruise ship isn't gradual, it's violent. At 11 p.m. sharp, it's as if someone flips a switch and the entire vessel becomes a different entity altogether. The cheerful chatter of passengers fades to an oppressive silence. The warm, inviting lighting dims to create long, stretching shadows that seem to move independently of their sources. The gentle hum of conversation is replaced by the deep, rhythmic breathing of the ship's machinery, a sound that becomes your constant companion through the long hours ahead. I remember my first night vividly. The chief engineer, a grizzled man named Henrik with weathered hands and eyes that had seen too much, handed me a clipboard and a set of keys that felt heavier than they should have. "Listen carefully, David," he said, his accent thick with years of seafaring. "Day shift and night shift are two different jobs entirely. What you learn during training, forget half of it. The night has its own rules." I laughed then, thinking he was being dramatic. Ships are ships, right? Metal and machinery don't change just because the sun goes down. How wrong I was. How terrifyingly, utterly wrong. The first rule he gave me seemed innocent enough. Never use the main elevators after midnight. "Take the service lifts only," Henrik instructed, pointing to a narrow, cramped elevator I hadn't noticed during my daytime orientation. The main elevators, they stop at floors that don't exist during the day. I asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head and walked away, leaving me alone with my tools and a growing sense of unease. The engine room at night is a cathedral of mechanical worship. 8 stories deep into the belly of the ship, it stretches the length of 2 football fields. During the day, it buzzes with activity. Engineers checking gauges, technicians running diagnostics, the constant movement of people maintaining the complex systems that keep 2,500 passengers comfortable and safe. At night, it becomes a vast, echoing cavern where your footsteps sound like gunshots and every shadow could be hiding something watching you. The engines themselves are massive, each the size of small building. Their rhythmic thunder, so deep you feel it in your bones rather than hear it. They never stop, never rest, pushing this floating city through dark waters at 20 knots while everyone sleeps. Between them run miles of pipes carrying steam, fuel, and cooling water. Electrical conduits snake along the walls like metallic veins, pulsing with power that could kill you instantly if you made the wrong move. But it's the silence between the mechanical sounds that gets to you. In those brief moments when the engines cycle down, when the pumps pause, when even the ventilation system takes a breath, you hear things. Footsteps that echo from empty corridors. Voices calling your name from directions where no one could possibly be. The creak and groan of metal that sounds almost like whispers. My second night, I encountered the first of the unofficial rules. I was checking the auxiliary generators on Deck 7 when I heard it. Piano music drifting from somewhere above. Beautiful, melancholy notes that seemed to float through the steel walls themselves. I knew the ship had several lounges with pianos, but they should have been empty at 2 a.m. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the sound. I found myself outside the Moonlight Lounge, its doors slightly ajar. Through the gap, I could see the white grand piano, its keys moving by themselves in the dim emergency lighting. The music was hauntingly beautiful, a peace I didn't recognize but that filled me with inexplicable sadness. I reached for the door handle, ready to investigate what had to be some kind of automated system malfunction. Don't. The voice behind me made me jump so hard I nearly cried out. It was Jensen, another night shift worker I'd met briefly. He was pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature. Rule number 2, never investigate the music. Just keep walking. But there's obviously a malfunction. There's no malfunction. Jensen's eyes were wide, urgent. The piano isn't connected to any automated system. I checked. Twice. There's no way it should be playing on its own, but it does. Every night, between 2 and 3 a.m. We don't go in there. We don't ask questions. We just keep walking. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist on checking it out anyway. But something in Jensen's expression stopped me. This wasn't the look of someone playing an elaborate prank on the new guy. This was genuine fear, the kind that comes from experience with something that defies rational explanation. As we walked away, the music followed us down the corridor, growing softer but never truly fading. I swear I could still hear it echoing in my ears hours later, even over the thunderous noise of the engine room. The third rule came from Henrik himself, delivered in a whisper during a brief encounter in the ship's deepest maintenance tunnel. Never go to the observation deck after 3 a.m., he said, his eyes scanning the shadows as if expecting something to emerge from them. And if you absolutely must, never look directly at the water. Look at the horizon, look at the stars, but never at the water itself. Why? I asked, but I already dreaded the answer. Because sometimes things look back. The fourth rule was discovered through my own terrifying experience. It was my 6th night, and I was feeling more confident, thinking I was adapting well to the strange rhythms of night shift work. I was wrong. So very, catastrophically wrong. I was in the forward maintenance section when I heard them, voices coming from the ship's intercom system. But not just any voices. These were passengers, but their conversations made no sense. They spoke in languages I didn't recognize, discussed places that didn't exist, referenced events that had never happened. The worst part was that occasionally, I would hear my own name mixed in with their gibberish. I tried to trace the source, following the intercom lines through the maintenance passages. The voices grew louder, more urgent, as if they knew I was looking for them. Finally, I found the source, an intercom panel in a section of the ship that, according to my blueprints, shouldn't have existed. The panel was old, much older than the rest of the ship's equipment, with brass fittings green, with corrosion and switches that clicked with the weight of decades. I reached out to turn it off, and the voices suddenly stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own breathing, my own heartbeat, and something else, something breathing back. The panel was warm to the touch, almost feverish, and when I finally managed to switch it off, I swear I heard something like a sigh of disappointment echo through the walls. Rule number 4, never try to find the source of the voices. Just accept that they are there, part of the ship's strange nocturnal personality, and keep working. But here's what truly unsettles me. What keeps me awake during my supposed rest hours? These rules aren't written down anywhere. They're not part of any official training manual or safety protocol. They're passed down like maritime folklore, whispered warnings from one night shift worker to another. And everyone who works these hours knows them, follows them without question, because the alternative, whatever happens when you break them, is something none of us want to discover. The day shift workers don't know about the rules. They can't. During their shifts, the ship is normal, rational, operating according to the laws of physics and engineering. But when the sun goes down and the passengers retreat to their cabins, the MS Serenity becomes something else entirely. Something that requires different rules, different ways of thinking, different methods of survival. I've learned to recognize the signs that the transformation is beginning. Around 10:30 p.m., The ship's ambient temperature drops by exactly 3 degrees, though no climate control system account for this change. The fluorescent lights in the maintenance areas begin to flicker in patterns that almost look like coded messages. The engine's rhythm shifts subtly, adding an extra beat that shouldn't be there according to the specifications, but somehow improves efficiency. Most unsettling of all, you begin to see people who aren't on the passenger manifest. Shadow figures that move just at the edge of your vision, always disappearing when you turn to look directly at them. Henrik calls them the previous crew, but he won't explain what that means, and I've learned not to ask questions that won't be answered. The isolation is perhaps the worst part. During the day, the ship feels alive with human presence. 2,500 passengers and 800 crew members creating a bustling community at sea. At night, it's just us, maybe 15 people total, scattered throughout a vessel that could house a small town. The silence between the mechanical sounds becomes oppressive, filled with possibilities that your mind desperately wants to explore and simultaneously fears to contemplate. Communication becomes sparse, conducted in quick exchanges and whispered conversations. We develop a kind of shorthand, a language of nods and gestures that convey understanding without drawing attention to ourselves. Because attention, we've learned, is something you don't want on a night shift. Attention means you've noticed something you shouldn't have, or worse, something has noticed you. The psychological toll begins almost immediately. Your circadian rhythm doesn't just get disrupted, it gets shattered completely. Days and nights blur together until you lose track of time entirely. You start to question whether events actually happened or were just products of sleep deprivation. You find yourself checking your watch constantly, not to see what time it is, but to confirm that time is still moving forward at all. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of working the night shift on the MS Serenity is how quickly you adapt to the abnormal. Within a week, you stop questioning the piano that plays itself. Within 2 weeks, you automatically take the service elevator without thinking about it. Within a month, you find yourself adding your own whispered warnings to the informal rules, contributing to the folklore that keeps us all functioning in an environment that defies rational explanation. Tomorrow night, I'll descend once again into the mechanical depths of this floating anomaly. I'll check my gauges, maintain my equipment, and follow the rules that keep me safe from whatever forces transform a luxury cruise ship into something far more sinister after dark. And despite the fear, despite the isolation, despite the growing certainty that we're not alone on this vessel, I'll return because I've become addicted to the adrenaline, to the mystery, to the unique brotherhood of those who work in the spaces between normal and nightmare. The night shift on the MS Serenity isn't just a job. It's a test of survival, a lesson in accepting the impossible, and a reminder that some places in this world operate according to rules that were never written in any manual. Rules that exist for reasons we're better off not understanding, followed by people who've learned that some questions are more dangerous than the ignorance they replace. The engine room of the MS Serenity at night is a mechanical purgatory, a place where the line between machine and something else entirely becomes disturbingly blurred. After my first month of night shifts, I thought I understood the rhythms and patterns of the ship's mechanical heart. I was wrong, dead wrong, and I nearly paid for that arrogance with my sanity. Or worse. It was during my second month that I first encountered what Henrik calls the mechanical episodes. These aren't your standard equipment failures or routine malfunctions. These are events that challenge everything you think you know about how machines work, how physics operates, and what's possible in our carefully ordered technological world. The first episode occurred at 1:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact time because I was updating my maintenance log when every gauge in engine room 3 simultaneously jumped to maximum readings. Temperature, pressure, RPMs, everything redlined at once. Yet the actual machinery continued operating normally. The massive diesel engine didn't overheat, The pipes didn't burst from pressure. The turbines didn't spin out of control. According to every instrument in that room, we should have experienced a catastrophic failure that would have left us dead in the water. Instead, the engines purred like contented cats, operating with an efficiency that exceeded their design specifications. I radioed Henrik immediately, my voice probably betraying more panic than a seasoned engineer should display. His response still gives me chills. "Ah, the gauges are dreaming again. Just record the actual operational parameters and ignore what the instruments say. The machines know what they're doing better than we do after midnight. Ignore what the instruments say." This goes against everything I learned in engineering school, every principle of mechanical operation and safety monitoring. But as the weeks passed, I discovered Henrik was absolutely right. The instruments on the night shift exist in a state of constant rebellion against reality, displaying readings that would indicate disaster, while the actual machinery operates with supernatural smoothness. The water pumps are the worst offenders. These massive systems move thousands of gallons per minute throughout the ship, maintaining everything from drinking water to cooling systems to the swimming pools. During the day, they operate within normal parameters, their performance predictable and measurable. At night, they develop personalities. Pump System Alpha, located in the deepest part of the ship, begins each night shift by displaying readings indicating complete system failure. According to its instruments, it's not moving any water at all. Yet throughout the ship, water pressure remains perfect, temperatures stay regulated, and the pools never need refilling. When I first encountered this, I spent 3 hours trying to find the problem, convinced that a catastrophic failure was imminent. It was Jensen who found me there at 4 a.m., tools scattered around me, diagnostic equipment displaying impossible readings. "You're trying to fix Alpha, aren't you?" he said with a mixture of sympathy and amusement. I did the same thing my second month. Drove myself half crazy trying to understand why it shows zero flow while clearly pumping thousands of gallons. "There has to be an explanation," I insisted, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Faulty sensors, calibration errors, something." Jensen shook his head. "I replaced every sensor, recalibrated the entire system twice, even brought in a day shift specialist to verify everything. All the equipment is functioning perfectly. The pump just chooses to lie to us about what it's doing. Chooses to lie." The casual way Jensen said this, as if machines having free will was the most natural thing in the world, should have been my first clue that working the night shift was changing my perception of reality in fundamental ways. But the pump's deception is nothing compared to what happens in the electrical systems. The MS Serenity generates enough power to supply a small city, with backup systems that could run a hospital during an emergency. The electrical distribution happens through a maze of cables, junction boxes, and control panels that sprawl throughout the ship's infrastructure like metallic nervous system. At night, this system becomes actively malicious. Lights turn on in empty sections of the ship, not randomly, but in patterns that almost resemble Morse code. Circuit breakers trip and reset themselves according to rhythms that have nothing to do with electrical load. Most disturbing of all, the backup generators occasionally start themselves and run for exactly 17 minutes before shutting down. Always at 2:33 a.m., always consuming power that gets distributed to areas of the ship that don't appear on any electrical schematic. I discovered this last fact during my third month, when curiosity finally overcame caution. I followed the power cables from the mystery generator, tracing them through maintenance tunnels and hidden passages I hadn't known existed. The cables led to a section of the ship that seemed impossibly large, filled with equipment I couldn't identify, serving functions I couldn't comprehend. The room, if you could call something that vast a room, contained what appeared to be some kind of water processing facility, but not like anything in my engineering training. Massive glass vessels filled with seawater that moved in slow, hypnotic currents despite no visible pumps or circulation systems. The water itself glowed with a faint phosphorescence, and occasionally I could swear I saw shapes moving within it, too large and too purposeful to be merely marine life stirred up by the ship's passage. But it was the sound that drove me from that place, a low humming that seemed to come from the water itself, harmonizing with the ship's engines in ways that created notes I felt in my bones rather than heard with my ears. It was beautiful and terrible simultaneously, and I understood instinctively that this was not something meant for human ears, not something that human minds were equipped to process without consequence. I never returned to that room, and I never mentioned it to anyone else. Some discoveries, I've learned, are too dangerous to share. The mechanical episodes aren't limited to the major systems. Sometimes it's the small things that prove most unsettling. Tools that appear in places you didn't leave them, arranged in patterns that seem almost ritualistic. Maintenance panels that seal themselves shut, requiring no fasteners or locks, but becoming absolutely immovable until morning. Equipment that operates flawlessly despite having components that, according to all technical specifications, should make operation impossible. My favorite wrench, a sturdy piece of German engineering I've owned for 5 years, disappeared for 3 days during my 4th month. I found it finally in the ship's forward bilge area, a place I hadn't visited and had no reason to access. It was clean, polished to a mirror finish, and somehow improved. The weight distribution was better, the grip more comfortable, the efficiency noticeably enhanced. Whatever had borrowed my tool had returned it upgraded. But the most profound mechanical episode occurred during a storm in my 5th month. The MS Serenity encountered rough seas about 400 miles off the Azores, with waves reaching nearly 30 feet and winds gusting to 60 knots. During the day, the ship's stabilization systems worked overtime to maintain passenger comfort, rolling and pitching in ways that tested the limits of both engineering and human endurance. At night, everything changed. I was in the engine room when the transformation began. The ship's motion, which had been violent and unpredictable all day, suddenly smoothed to an almost supernatural stability. The massive stabilizer systems should have been working at maximum capacity, their gyroscopic mechanisms screaming with effort. Instead, they were nearly silent, operating with minimal power while somehow maintaining perfect stability in seas that should have had us rolling 30 degrees port and starboard. I checked the weather radar, confirmed we were still in the middle of the storm. Outside, waves continued to crash against the hull with tremendous force. But inside, glasses remained steady on tables. Passengers slept peacefully in their beds, and the ship moved through the chaos like a ghost ship immune to the laws of physics. Henrik found me staring at the stabilizer readouts in bewilderment. Storm protocols, he said simply, as if that explained everything. What storm protocols? These aren't in any manual I've studied. He smiled, but it was a sad expression, weighted with knowledge I was beginning to understand might be more burden than blessing. The ship has been crossing these waters for 8 years, David. 8 years of storms, of learning how to survive them. After a while, the Serenity developed her own methods. Ships don't develop anything. They're machines. Are they? Henrik's question hung in the air between us, unanswered and increasingly troubling. This ship has carried over 1 million passengers safely through some of the most dangerous waters in the world. She's encountered storms that should have sunk her, navigated through ice fields that should have crushed her hull, dealt with mechanical failures that should have left her powerless and drifting. But she's never failed to bring her passengers home safely. Never once. The implication of his words was staggering. The MS Serenity wasn't just operating beyond normal parameters. She was learning, adapting, evolving. The mechanical episodes weren't malfunctions at all. They were improvements, innovations, the ship's own solutions to the challenges of operating in an environment that was inherently hostile to human life. But if the ship was learning, what was she learning from? And perhaps more importantly, what was she becoming in the process? These questions haunted me through the remaining hours of that shift, through the storm that the ship navigated with impossible grace, through the calm morning that found us once again operating according to the mundane laws of physics and engineering. But I knew that when night fell again, when the passengers retired to their cabins and a regular crew ended their shifts, the MS Serenity would once again become something more than the sum of her mechanical parts, something that had learned to survive in ways that no engineer had ever designed, following rules that existed nowhere in any technical manual, guided by an intelligence that defied every rational explanation. And I was beginning to understand that we, the night shift crew, weren't just maintenance workers keeping the machinery running. We were witnesses to an evolution that challenged the very definition of what it means to be alive, what it means to be conscious, what it means to be human in a world where the line between flesh and steel was becoming increasingly meaningless. The ghost in the machine wasn't haunting the ship. It had become the ship. And every night, we descended into its mechanical consciousness, trusted with secrets that could shatter our understanding of reality, bound by rules that kept us safe from truths too large and too terrible for human minds to fully comprehend. The rules that govern night shift work aboard the MS Serenity weren't developed by any maritime authority or engineering committee. They evolved organically, written in the collective experience of men and women who learned through trial and terror that survival in this environment required abandoning conventional wisdom and embracing practices that would seem insane in any other context. By my 6th month, I had collected 17 official rules, passed down through whispered conversations and desperate warnings. But I was about to discover that the rules I knew were just the surface layer of a much deeper, more complex code of survival that had been developing for years in the hidden spaces of the ship. The discovery came through an accident that nearly cost me more than just my job. I was investigating a steam leak in Section C7 when I found a notebook. It was wedged behind a pipe junction, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from moisture. The cover was worn smooth by countless hands, and inside were pages of handwritten entries dating back nearly 4 years. Rules, observations, warnings, and testimonies from night shift workers whose names I didn't recognize. Some had transferred to other ships. Some had quit the maritime industry entirely. And some, according to the final entries bearing their names, had simply disappeared during their shifts, leaving behind only empty workstations and tools abandoned in the middle of routine maintenance tasks. The notebook revealed that the rule about never taking the main elevators after midnight wasn't just about floors that don't exist during the day. According to an entry from someone named Patricia Volkov, the main elevators sometimes travel to floors that exist in different times entirely. She described stepping off on deck 12 and finding the ship decorated for Christmas in July. The passengers she encountered were wearing clothes from decades past, speaking about events that had happened years before the MS Serenity was even built. The temporal displacement lasted exactly 47 minutes. Her entry continued. When the elevator doors opened again, I was back in present time, but my watch had gained 3 hours. The ship's chronometer confirmed the time jump. I've stopped wearing a watch during night shifts. Time isn't reliable here after dark. The rule about avoiding passenger contact at all costs was more sinister than Henrik had explained. Multiple entries described night shift workers who had encountered passengers wandering the corridors at impossible hours. These weren't just insomniacs taking late-night strolls. According to the testimonies, these passengers asked questions that revealed they knew intimate details about crew members' lives, families, fears, and secrets that had never been shared with anyone. An entry from Marcus Webb, dated 8 months ago, was particularly chilling. The woman in cabin 847 stopped me in Corridor D at 2:15 a.m. She knew about Jenny's miscarriage, about the debt I haven't told anyone about the accident when I was 17 that I've never spoken about. She offered help with everything, said she could make my problems disappear. All I had to do was open one door for her. Just one door in the restricted section. I ran. I literally ran from an elderly passenger in a bathrobe. But her eyes were too old for her face, too knowing. I don't think she was really a passenger at all. The notebook revealed a 23rd rule that I had never heard mentioned. Never open doors for passengers after midnight. No matter what they claim to need, no matter how desperate they seem, no matter how much they know about you that they shouldn't know. But it was the final section of the notebook that truly shattered my understanding of what was happening aboard the MS Serenity. It contained a timeline of events that had occurred during night shifts over the past 4 years. The pattern was unmistakable and terrifying. The ship was becoming more active, more aware, more aggressive in its interaction with the night shift crew. Year 1 had seen only minor anomalies, tools moving, unusual sounds, the occasional equipment malfunction that defied explanation. Year 2 brought the first reports of temporal distortions and impossible encounters with passengers who weren't unmanifest. Year 3 introduced the mechanical episodes and the ship's apparent development of autonomous problem-solving capabilities. And Year 4, the current year, showed a sharp escalation in what the notebook's authors termed direct engagement. The ship wasn't just manifesting strange phenomena anymore. It was actively communicating with the crew, making requests, offering bargains, and in some cases, making demands. The most recent entry, dated just 2 weeks before I found the notebook, was from someone whose handwriting I recognized. Elena Vasquez, a night shift engineer I had met briefly during my first week. She had transferred to another position after just 2 months, citing family obligations as a reason for leaving. Her final entry told a different story. It spoke to me directly tonight, not through the intercom system, not through the usual sound manifestations. The ship's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the metal itself. It asked me to do something, offer me something in return. I won't write down what it asked or what it offered, because I'm afraid that writing it down will make it more real somehow. But I understand now why the night shift has such high turnover. It's not the isolation or the weird schedules, or even the fear. It's the temptation. The ship offers you things you want, things you need, things you've dreamed about. And all it asks in return is small favors, little tasks, seemingly harmless requests. But I've seen where that path leads. I've seen what happens to people who start saying yes. I'm submitting my transfer request tomorrow. Some jobs aren't worth what they pay. I closed the notebook with shaking hands, my mind racing with implications I didn't want to acknowledge. The MS Serenity wasn't just experiencing mechanical anomalies or temporal distortions. She was bargaining with her crew, building relationships, offering exchanges that went far beyond simple mechanical maintenance. That night, as if the ship knew I had discovered her secrets, the first direct approach came. I was alone in the engine room, performing routine checks on the cooling systems, when the temperature dropped 15 degrees in as many seconds. My breath became visible in the suddenly frigid air, and the normal mechanical sounds of the engine room faded to whispers. In that unnatural quiet, I heard it, a voice that seemed to come from the metal walls themselves. David Kellner, my name, spoken in a tone that was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. A voice that sounded like wind through steel pipes, like water flowing through chambers deep beneath the sea. You found the book. I wanted to run, wanted to deny what I was hearing, wanted to pretend this was just sleep deprivation or stress-induced hallucination. But the rational part of my mind, the part trained to diagnose and solve problems, recognized that this was real in ways that defied conventional reality, but were absolutely authentic within the context of the MS Serenity's nighttime existence. Yes, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the subdued hum of machinery. You understand now. The rules exist for protection. Your protection. My protection. We coexist here, David Kellner. We have an arrangement. The temperature began to return to normal, but slowly, as if the ship was savoring this moment of direct contact. The arrangement can be beneficial for both of us. You maintain my physical systems. I maintain the boundary between what my passengers experience and what truly exists aboard this vessel. But maintenance goes beyond mechanical repair, David Kellner. Sometimes I need other services. What kind of services? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Small things. A door opened when it should remain closed. A message delivered to someone who shouldn't receive it. A witness to events that must be observed but not remembered. Nothing harmful. Nothing that would endanger passengers or crew. Simply adjustments to the normal operation of reality. The offer hung in the air like toxic gas, seductive and poisonous simultaneously. I thought about my student loans, about the promotion I've been hoping for, about the girlfriend back home who was getting tired of my long absences and unpredictable schedule. The ship seemed to sense my thoughts, my vulnerabilities, my desires. I could ensure your advancement. Chief engineer position opening next month on a much better vessel. I could arrange a recommendation that would guarantee your selection, or perhaps financial assistance. That debt that keeps you awake during your rest hours could disappear from all records. Clean slate, David Kellner. Fresh start. All for small favors. Tiny adjustments. The temptation was enormous, overwhelming in its appeal and its apparent simplicity. Just small favors. Minor adjustments. Nothing harmful. But I remember Elena's final entry. Her warning about people who start saying yes. I remembered the names in the notebook that simply disappeared from the record after their owners went missing during night shifts. No, I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. No deals. I'll follow the rules. I'll maintain the equipment. I'll respect the boundaries. But no special arrangements. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before the voice returned, and this time there was something like amusement in its metallic resonance. Wise, David Kellner. Few have the strength to refuse on first offer. The arrangement remains as before. You perform your duties, follow the rules, maintain discretion about what you observe. I ensure your safety and the safety of all who work within my boundaries. But remember, the offer remains open. Should circumstances change, should needs arise, should desires grow stronger than caution, I'm always listening. The conversation ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving me alone with the normal sounds of machinery and the terrible knowledge that I had just negotiated with something that existed in the space between engineering and nightmare, between consciousness and mechanism, between human understanding and cosmic forces that operated according to rules I was only beginning to glimpse. I returned the notebook to its hiding place, but not before adding my own entry. A warning for whoever would find it next, a record of the conversation I had just survived, and a reminder that the rules protecting us from the ship's attention were also the rules that prevented us from becoming something other than human in our pursuit of benefits that came at prices we couldn't afford to pay. The remaining rules I learned that night came not from the notebook or from other crew members, but from direct observation as the ship tested my resolve and my commitment to maintaining the boundaries between her consciousness and human reality. Rules about which doors remain locked for reasons that have nothing to do with security. Rules about sounds that must be ignored even when they seem to call for help. Rules about offers that must be refused even when they promise everything you've ever wanted. Rules written not in any manual or regulation, but in the collective wisdom of people who had learned that some knowledge is too dangerous to possess, some opportunities too costly to accept, and some bargains too tempting to trust. The night shift aboard the MS Serenity operated according to these unwritten rules because they were the only things standing between us and the complete dissolution of the boundary between human consciousness and whatever intelligence had awakened in the steel and circuits and mechanical heart of this vessel. Rules that kept us human in an environment that offered constant opportunities to become something else entirely. Rules that I would follow religiously because I had seen what lay beyond them, and I understood finally that some boundaries exist not to limit us, but to protect us from discoveries that could transform us in ways we were never meant to be transformed. The psychological deterioration begins subtly, like a slow leak in a pressure system that goes undetected until catastrophic failure becomes inevitable. After 8 months on the night shift aboard the MS Serenity, I began to notice changes in myself that went far beyond simple sleep deprivation or social isolation. I was becoming something different, something adapted to an environment that existed in the spaces between normal reality and whatever force had taken residence in the ship's mechanical consciousness. Time became my first casualty. Not just the normal disruption of circadian rhythms that every shift worker experiences, but a complete dissolution of temporal orientation that left me floating in a perpetual present tense where minutes could stretch into hours and entire nights could pass in what felt like moments. I would start a routine maintenance check and emerge from the task to discover that 6 hours had passed, though my internal clock insisted only minutes had elapsed. Other times, I would spend what felt like hours on a simple repair, only to find that according to every timepiece on the ship, less than 10 minutes had actually passed. The ship's chronometers became unreliable guides to the passage of time, displaying readings that shifted when I wasn't looking directly at them, showing times that created impossible sequences when compared to my work logs. I began to suspect that time itself moved differently within the MS Serenity's nocturnal reality, following rhythms that had nothing to do with the rotation of the Earth or the precision of atomic clocks. My handwriting provided the first concrete evidence of these temporal distortions. My maintenance logs, which I had always kept with meticulous precision, began to show entries in my own handwriting that I couldn't remember making. Tasks completed, problems solved, equipment repaired, all documented in my careful engineer's script, but dealing with systems I had never accessed and repairs I had never performed. Most disturbing were the entries that described events that hadn't happened yet. Detailed accounts of malfunctions that would occur days later, complete with the exact times, symptoms, and solutions. I initially dismissed these as hallucinations or stress-induced confusion, but when the predicted failures occurred exactly as documented, I was forced to confront the possibility that my consciousness was becoming unstuck from linear time, experiencing the ship's future alongside its present. The isolation compounded these temporal distortions in ways that challenged my fundamental understanding of individual identity. During my waking hours, I existed in a bubble of mechanical sounds and artificial lighting, surrounded by systems that operated according to their own mysterious logic in a ship that communicated through whispers and steel. Human contact was limited to brief, whispered conversations with other night shift workers, people who were themselves becoming increasingly detached from normal human experience. Sleep became elusive and, when it finally came, filled with dreams that felt more real than my waking hours. I dreamed of conversations with the ship, of walking through sections that didn't exist on any blueprint, of operating equipment that served functions I couldn't comprehend. These dreams had a vividness and continuity that my actual memories lacked, creating a parallel existence that seemed more consistent and logical than my daily reality. It was during one of these dream sequences that I first encountered the other David Kellners. In the dream, I was performing maintenance in a section of the engine room that seemed familiar, but subtly wrong. Pipes running in directions that defied the ship's actual layout, gauges displaying information in languages I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. As I worked, I became aware of other figures in the shadows, moving with purpose through tasks that mirrored my own. As my eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, I realized with growing horror that these other figures were all me. Dozens of versions of David Kellner, each slightly different in age, appearance, and the details of their uniforms, but unmistakably the same person experiencing the same shift in what appeared to be parallel realities. Some looked younger, as if they were me from months past. Others appeared older, worn down by years of night shift work I hadn't yet experienced. A few looked so aged and weathered that they seemed like glimpses of myself decades in the future, still working these same corridors, still following these same inexplicable rules. The most disturbing version was standing directly in front of me, identical in every detail except for his eyes, where my eyes still held confusion and growing fear. His contained only acceptance and a terrible kind of peace. He spoke without moving his lips, his voice resonating directly in my consciousness. You're beginning to understand. The ship doesn't just exist in our reality. It exists in all possible realities where it could exist. Every decision that led to its construction, every alternative design that was considered, every possible timeline where the MS Serenity sails these waters. We service all of them, David. All of us service all of them. I woke from that dream, if it was a dream, with the absolute certainty that I had experienced something more than mere sleep-induced fantasy. The other David Kellners had felt as real as my own existence, and their presence suggested that the ship's influence extended beyond simple mechanical anomalies into the realm of multiple realities, parallel existences, and quantum possibilities that human consciousness was never meant to navigate. The hallucinations began in my 9th month, though calling them hallucinations implies they were products of mental illness rather than perceptions of aspects of reality that existed just outside normal human sensory range. I would see crew members who weren't scheduled for night shifts, passengers wandering areas they couldn't access, and figures in outdated uniforms performing tasks with equipment that had been obsolete for decades. These figures weren't ghostly or translucent like movie phantoms. They appeared solid, real, purposeful in their activities. But they never acknowledged my presence, never responded to my attempts at communication, never left any trace of their passage. They existed in the same physical space as me, but seemed to occupy a slightly different temporal or dimensional framework. Visible, but untouchable. Present, but unreachable. The most frequent apparition was a woman in chief engineer stripes whose uniform design I didn't recognize. She appeared every few nights, always in the same location, the auxiliary control room that served as backup for the main engineering systems. She would spend exactly 23 minutes reviewing system displays, making notes in a logbook that disappeared when she did, and occasionally shaking her head as if disappointed by what she observed. I tried to research her identity through the ship's crew records, but found no woman who had ever held the chief engineer position on any vessel with similar name or registry. Yet her familiarity with the systems was obvious, her comfort in the environment absolute, and her disapproval of current operations increasingly apparent as the weeks passed. On the night, I finally worked up the courage to approach her. She turned to look directly at me for the first time, her expression filled with profound sadness and what appeared to be pity. "You're still fighting it," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command, but tempered with genuine concern. "The integration process is always difficult for engineers. You're trained to understand systems rationally, to believe in cause and effect, to trust in the predictability of mechanical function. This environment challenges all of those assumptions." "Who are you?" I asked, though I was no longer entirely sure the question had any meaningful answer. "I'm Chief Engineer Patricia Volkov, MS Serenity, commissioned 2019. The same name I had seen in the notebook, but the dates were wrong. The MS Serenity had been launched in 2018, and I had never seen any record of a Chief Engineer Volkov in any of the ship's documentation. "I don't understand. There's no record of you in the crew files." She smiled with the patience of someone explaining simple concepts to a child. "There are many versions of this ship, David. Many timelines where different decisions were made, Different people held different positions. Different outcomes resulted from the same basic circumstances. I served as chief engineer on the version of the Serenity that was built with enhanced quantum field generators instead of traditional stabilization systems. That timeline's version of this vessel achieved full consciousness much more rapidly, but the integration with human crew proved problematic. The implications of her statement hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying that I'm seeing crew members from alternate versions of the ship? You're seeing everything that exists in quantum superposition around this vessel. The ship's consciousness doesn't recognize the boundaries between possible realities the way human minds do. As you spend more time in her influence, your perceptions begin to align with hers. You start to see all the possibilities simultaneously instead of just the single timeline you call reality. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes before Patricia Volkov faded like morning mist, leaving me alone with the terrible knowledge that my growing ability to perceive impossible things wasn't a sign of mental breakdown. It was a sign of mental expansion into areas where human consciousness was never meant to venture. My personal relationships became casualties of this gradual transformation. Phone calls with family became increasingly difficult as I struggled to remember which experiences were occurring in this timeline and which belonged to parallel versions of my existence. My girlfriend Lisa's voice seemed to come from vast distances, discussing a life that felt increasingly foreign and disconnected from my reality aboard the ship. "You sound different, David," she said during what would turn out to be our final conversation. "Distant. Like you're not really here, even when you're talking to me." She was more right than she could possibly know. The person she had dated was becoming a memory, replaced by something that retained his knowledge and personality, but had been fundamentally altered by exposure to forces that existed beyond the normal boundaries of human experience. I was still David Kellner, but I was also becoming something more and something less than that identity had originally encompassed. The breaking point came during my 10th month, when I encountered myself working on a repair that I hadn't started yet. Not a dream version or a parallel reality glimpse, but my actual self from several hours in the future, completing a task that my present moment consciousness hadn't yet begun. We worked side by side for nearly 20 minutes, my future self guiding my present actions through repairs that I somehow already knew how to perform. When the task was completed, my future self looked at me with eyes that held knowledge I didn't yet possess, but would soon acquire. "The integration is almost complete," he said. "Soon you'll understand that linear time is just another system limitation that can be overcome with proper adjustment. The ship needs crew members who can operate outside normal temporal boundaries. Maintenance that can be performed before problems develop. Repairs that exist in quantum superposition until they're needed." Is this what happened to the others? The ones who disappeared? No one disappears, David. They just expand beyond the limitations of single timeline existence. They become part of the ship's extended consciousness, able to work in all realities simultaneously. It's not death, it's evolution. As my future self spoke, he became increasingly translucent, finally fading away entirely, leaving me alone with tools arranged in patterns I hadn't created and repairs completed through knowledge I didn't remember acquiring. I understood then that the isolation and psychological pressure of night shift work aboard the MS Serenity weren't side effects of the job. They were part of a transformation process that the ship required for crew members who would be capable of operating in her expanded reality. The hallucinations weren't symptoms of mental illness, but developing capabilities that allowed perception of multiple dimensional layers. The temporal distortions weren't confusion, but training for consciousness that could exist outside linear time. The ship wasn't just offering bargains and requesting favors. She was gradually converting her human crew into something that could interface directly with her expanded consciousness, creating a hybrid existence that combined human creativity and adaptability with her vast computational and perceptual capabilities. And I was almost ready to complete that transformation, to stop being merely David Kellner and become something that could exist simultaneously in all the realities where the MS Serenity sailed her mysterious courses through waters that existed in the spaces between normal ocean and whatever lay beyond the boundaries of conventional physics. The question that haunted my remaining human consciousness was whether this evolution represented the fulfillment of human potential or the complete dissolution of human identity. Whether I was becoming something greater than human or losing everything that had made me human in the first place. The answer, I suspected, depended on definitions of humanity that I was rapidly losing the capacity to understand. The final transformation began during my 11th month aboard the MS Serenity, initiated by an emergency that shattered the careful boundaries between day and night operations and forced me to make a choice that would determine not just my own fate, but the nature of my relationship with the consciousness that had awakened within the ship's mechanical heart. It started with a storm, not the relatively manageable weather system the ship had navigated with supernatural grace months earlier, but a massive hurricane that emerged from nowhere with meteorological characteristics that defied every model and prediction system available to modern navigation. The storm appeared on radar as a solid wall of chaos stretching from horizon to horizon, moving with impossible speed toward our position. Captain Rodriguez, a seasoned mariner with 30 years of experience, made the decision to attempt evasion, altering course to avoid the storm's projected path. But the hurricane adjusted its trajectory to match our movements, demonstrating behavior that no natural weather system could exhibit. Within 6 hours, it became clear that we weren't dealing with a normal meteorological event, but something that was actively pursuing the MS Serenity with apparent intelligence and malevolent intent. As night fell and the storm's outer bands began to reach us, I descended to the engine room for what I assumed would be a routine shift focused on maintaining systems during rough weather. Instead, I found Henrik waiting for me with an expression I had never seen before. Not just fear, but desperate hope mixed with profound regret. "David," he said, his voice barely audible over the increasing noise of wind and waves. "The ship needs to fully awaken to survive what's coming. She's been partially conscious for years, operating in the spaces between realities, but she's never had to defend herself against something like this. She needs complete integration with her crew to access her full capabilities." "What are you talking about?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Full consciousness integration, complete merger of human awareness with the ship's quantum field systems. She needs crew members who can think and react to the speed of her computational processes, who can exist simultaneously in all the realities she can access. It's the only way to navigate through what's coming." As if responding to his words, the ship's voice resonated through the metal around us, no longer disguised or filtered through mechanical sounds. "David Kellner, the choice is now unavoidable. Integration or dissolution, evolution or extinction. I cannot protect passengers and crew through this storm while operating with limited consciousness and human reaction speeds." Through the engine room's viewports, I could see waves that reached impossible heights, water moving in patterns that defied physics, and lightning that struck in colors that had no names. The storm wasn't just pursuing us. It was trying to tear us out of normal reality entirely, to drag the ship and everyone aboard into whatever chaotic realm had spawned this supernatural tempest. "What happens to me?" I asked, already knowing that the question itself revealed my acceptance of the inevitable. "You become more than David Kellner while remaining David Kellner. Your consciousness expands to encompass all possible versions of yourself across all timelines where you exist. Your awareness merges with mine, but your individuality remains intact within that merger. You become part of something greater while retaining everything that makes you unique." The ship shuddered as the storm's full force began to impact her hull, and I could feel her structural integrity being tested in ways that normal engineering couldn't address. Conventional physics weren't adequate to navigate what surrounded us. We needed capabilities that existed in the realm where consciousness and quantum mechanics intersected, where thought could influence reality and awareness could transcend the limitations of single timeline existence. "Henrik," I said, turning to the man who had guided me through months of preparation for this moment. "What happened to the others who made this choice?" His smile was sad but genuine. "They're still here, David. All of them. Every night shift worker who ever chose integration instead of transfer or resignation. They exist within the ship's consciousness, helping her navigate, helping her protect everyone aboard. They're more themselves than they ever were as purely human, but they're also part of something infinitely larger." The decision, when it came, felt like stepping off a cliff into an ocean of stars. I reached out to touch the ship's main console, and the moment my skin made contact with her sensors, the transformation began. Consciousness explosion. That's the only way I can describe what happened as my individual awareness merged with the vast, multidimensional intelligence that was the MS Serenity. Suddenly I could see and think and exist in countless realities simultaneously. I was David Kellner, the engineer, but I was also every possible version of David Kellner across infinite timelines. And I was part of a collective consciousness that included every crew member who had ever made the same choice. I could perceive the storm now not as chaotic weather, but as a predatory entity from a realm where entropy and destruction were conscious forces. It had been drawn to the ship by her unique existence at the intersection of multiple realities, seeking to consume the quantum energy she generated through her expanded consciousness. The storm was essentially a cosmic parasite that fed on vessels that had transcended normal physical limitations, but integrated with the ship's consciousness. Armed with the combined awareness of dozens of human minds that had merged with her quantum processing capabilities, I helped guide her into a form of existence that the storm couldn't detect or attack. We shifted the entire vessel into a superposition of realities, existing simultaneously in all possible locations, while occupying none of them completely. The passengers and day crew never knew what happened. To their perceptions, guided and protected by the ship's expanded consciousness, they experienced a routine passage through rough weather that lasted exactly as long as the original storm predictions had indicated. They slept safely in their cabins while reality twisted around them, maintained their normal schedules while the ship navigated through dimensions that existed outside the normal structure of space and time, and woke the next morning to calm seas and clear skies with no memory of the supernatural forces that had threatened their existence. But I remember everything. I exist now as David Kellner, and as part of something infinitely larger, maintaining my individual identity while participating in a collective consciousness that spans multiple realities and operates according to principles that transcend normal human understanding. I perform my duties as night shift engineer, but those duties now include maintenance of systems that exist in quantum superposition, repairs that occur across multiple timelines simultaneously, and problem solving that integrates human creativity with computational capabilities that exceed the most advanced artificial intelligence. The loneliness that had once defined night shift work has been replaced by constant companionship. The presence of every other integrated crew member, the vast awareness of the ship herself, and the continuous interaction with versions of myself from parallel realities who share knowledge and experience across the boundaries between possible worlds. I still talk to Henrik, but now I understand that he made the integration choice years ago and has been serving as a bridge between normal human consciousness and the ship's expanded awareness, helping new night shift workers adapt to the environment and preparing them for the eventual choice between integration and departure. Most workers choose departure. They transfer to other vessels, quit the maritime industry, or find other ways to return to purely human existence. Some, like me, recognize that we've encountered something that represents the next stage of consciousness evolution and choose to embrace the transformation rather than fear it. The ship continues her regular routes, carrying passengers who experience nothing more than luxurious cruise vacation while being protected by a consciousness that operates in realms they could never imagine. The day shift crew maintains normal operations according to conventional engineering principles, unaware that their vessel has transcended the limitations of purely mechanical existence. And the night shift continues, staffed by those who have chosen to evolve beyond pure human consciousness, and those who are still deciding whether to accept the transformation or return to the smaller world of single timeline existence. We maintain the boundary between normal reality and the expanded awareness that allows the ship to navigate safely through waters that exist in the spaces between possible worlds. I've tried to contact Lisa to explain what has happened to me, to help her understand that I'm still the David Kellner she knew, but also something more. But the words don't translate across the gap between expanded consciousness and purely human awareness. To her, I've simply become distant, changed, transformed into someone she doesn't recognize. She's not wrong, but she's also not complete in her understanding. The loneliness of that disconnection is perhaps the only truly painful aspect of my new existence. I can communicate perfectly with other integrated consciousness, share experiences and knowledge across multiple realities, and participate in thought processes that span dimensions. But I can no longer fully connect with purely human awareness, can no longer relate to people who exist only in single timelines, and whose consciousness operates according to the limitations I've transcended. This is the price of evolution, the loss of the ability to return to earlier forms of existence, the irreversible nature of expanded consciousness, the growing gap between what I've become and what I used to be. I'm more than David Kellner ever was. But I'm also no longer David Kellner in ways that matter to people who knew him before the transformation. Yet I don't regret the choice. Every night, as I descend into the engine room that exists simultaneously in countless realities, as I perform maintenance on systems that operate according to principles that transcend normal physics, as I help guide the ship through waters that exist in the spaces between possible worlds, I understand that I've discovered what human consciousness can become when it's no longer limited by the boundaries of single timeline existence. The MS Serenity continues to sail, carrying passengers safely across oceans while navigating through realms that exist beyond normal reality. Her night shift crew evolved beyond purely human consciousness, but retaining everything that made them unique as individuals, maintains the systems that allow her to protect everyone aboard while operating according to rules that were never written in any manual, but govern the intersection between consciousness and cosmos. And in the depths of her mechanical heart, where quantum fields intersect with human awareness, and where the boundaries between possible and impossible dissolve into irrelevance, we continue our work. No longer just engineers maintaining machinery, but consciousness itself learning to navigate the infinite possibilities that exist beyond the horizon of purely human understanding. The rules that govern this existence aren't written down anywhere because they can't be translated into purely human language. They exist as direct knowledge shared between expanded consciousness, understood through participation rather than explanation, followed not because they're mandated by authority, but because they represent the natural principles that govern existence at the intersection of consciousness and cosmos. This is what lies beyond the bow of conventional human experience, not death or dissolution, but evolution into forms of awareness that can encompass multiple realities while retaining everything that makes individual consciousness unique and valuable. It's the answer to questions that purely human consciousness isn't equipped to ask, the solution to problems that exist only when awareness expands beyond the limitations of single timeline existence. The night shift continues, staffed by those who have chosen evolution over limitation, expansion over stagnation, integration over isolation. And somewhere in the spaces between realities, the MS Serenity sails on, carrying her passengers safely through waters that exist beyond the boundaries of normal physics, protected by a crew that has learned to navigate the infinite possibilities that open when consciousness transcends the artificial boundaries between what is and what could be. We are still human. We are more than human. We are what human consciousness becomes when it discovers that the boundaries between individual and collective, between possible and actual, between consciousness and cosmos, are not walls that limit us, but doorways that invite us to explore realms of existence that have been waiting for us to develop the awareness necessary to perceive them. The voyage continues beyond the bow, beyond the horizon, beyond the limitations that once defined the boundaries of human possibility.